I met Lucy for the first time when she fell asleep on my arm on the bus. When she woke up, she gave me a really weird look before shambling off the bus. I figured she was weirded out that I didn't wake her sooner, so I kicked myself for being a creep and I went on with my day. I can't win them all. I was thrown for a heck of a loop when her whole friend group was sitting by my usual spot on the bus the next day. Being an awkward teen, I wasn't about to turn down any kind of positive attention. I got to know her friends and ended up on good terms with her before I realized that I hadn't asked her name. I'm hard on hearing, so I didn't hear her when she said her name. Lucy, right? Yeah. Lucy and I had your typical high school courting process. That is to say, she was overwhelmingly forward after a few weeks, and I got the hint. As we were getting close, Lucy would fixate on learning about past heartbreak and finding out about my personal life. I'm a serial oversharer, so I didn't really mind talking about myself, but she would constantly butt in by saying how messed up things were and that she would kick my friend's butt for hurting me. I was weirded out. Even at 16, I knew that was cringy and I was going through my emo phase. The thing that really bugged me at the time was that she would ask so much about me, but she would never say anything about herself. It made me feel really crappy always venting and never helping her out. During this time, she missed a few days and I let another girl sit by me since it was an overcrowded bus and I didn't think it mattered. When Lucy came back and saw me with another girl, you would think that she was shot. She just about ran to the seat behind us and started going off. I can't remember what exactly Lucy said, but the other girl never talked to me again after that. Once her rival was gone, Lucy reclaimed her spot next to me and was all sunshine and rainbows. Nobody ever asked to sit in Lucy's spot after that. Lucy always had a crude sense of humor, but after a while, things started getting hurtful. She would take jabs at my insecurities, and anytime I got upset about it, she would give me crap for not being able to take a joke. These jokes usually stopped just shy of outright insulting me. When Lucy wasn't breaking me down, she was super affectionate. She would sleep on my chest while we rode home on the bus, and she'd even talk about herself from time to time. I don't remember the first time that she hit me. It seems like something that would be burned into my memory, some kind of cinematic moment in my life. Honestly, it all just blended together after a while. I know it started off small though, flicking me and playful slapping. By the end of it, she would elbow me in the ribs for telling a bad joke. It didn't register as anything abusive until she had slammed me into a wall while we were walking through the hallway after class. I told a crappy joke and she shoved me hard into the wall. She laughed because of the sound that I made before shoving me again. People were going through the halls with us, but they didn't do anything. Sometimes I wonder what they thought of me. I didn't dump her after the hallway incident, but I did start standing up for myself. We started getting into a lot of fights after that. Of course, they only ever ended in one of two ways. She was right or it was an honest mistake. I tried to break things off a few times around that time, but every time I did, she had a new sob story I hadn't heard before that made her actions totally understandable. I let it get to my head that she was some tragic soul that I could help her. I convinced myself there was something noble about taking the abuse and nobody I knew tried to step in and stop me. I finally got the nerve to dump her after 3 major things happened within a 3-week span. First, I found out that she was taking pictures of me while I wasn't looking and posting them online. The weird thing was that I only found out because she showed me. It felt gross seeing a bunch of nearly identical pictures of me not facing the camera. The way that she showed me was worse. She seemed excited like I would be happy that she had invaded my privacy. The second weird thing happened when I tried to wake her on the bus. After about a half hour on my chest of not saying anything, I nudged her shoulder since we were at our stop and she had to get up. But she looked me in the eye and told me that she wasn't asleep. Combined with the pictures, this seemed really weird to me. She didn't try to be cute or romantic about it or anything, just, I pretend to sleep on you sometimes. Like, what the hell? The breaking point came when she was showing off some award that she got from school. There was something off about the award. It didn't have her name on it. Oh no, it had a name. It even had a picture of her smiling on it. The problem was, it wasn't addressed to Lucy. You can't imagine what I felt when I found out that I didn't even know my girlfriend's name. A few days later, we got into one of our usual fights and I broke things off. Lucy was always the persistent type. She would sit a few rows behind me on the bus and just stare at me while I went to my car after getting off the bus. Looking at her wouldn't make her stop. I felt like she wanted to know that she was watching me. One day when she got on the bus, she looked me right in the eyes for a solid 20 seconds while she walked past me to her new seat. I'm pretty sure that she was expecting me to say something to her. The next year I graduated and I got a retail job. End of the story, right? I thought so too. It was the start of Christmas season and I was working cashier that night. Lucy came into the store that I was working at by random chance. It had been a year and a half since we had broke up at this point, so I wasn't happy to see her. But surely we could pretend that it wasn't weird. She gave me the look the squirrel in Ice Age gives his knot. She grabbed something from the front and went right into my line. She didn't say a word to me, but she wouldn't break eye contact, and she was swaying like an excited toddler. It hurt to look at her. I rang her up silently and waited for her to leave. I looked at the other cashier for support and he told me that she was giving her weird vibes. I got this really bad gut feeling after she had left. Lucy became a regular in our little shop. She would come in and creep up my coworkers. Lucy never really tried to hide what she was doing. One of the cashiers mentioned how often she came while ringing her out and she said that she was visiting me. She didn't say my name, but she described me. After that, whenever she showed up, someone would make a note of it on the radio. She was usually in one of the areas bordering my workspace. I heard about her a lot more than I saw her, so I think she was hiding from me. She never got banned from the store despite complaints because the managers were very penny pinching, who would sell any one of us out to get sales up. I knew Lucy was responsible for at least one resignation from my workplace. Someone who looked like me caught her staring a few times and heard how often she came. After a while, the stress just wasn't worth minimum wage. The last time that I saw Lucy at the store was a little over a year ago now. I was hanging out with one of the girls in the back while we were loading up carts with stuff that we had to stock. We were right by the back entrance, so you could see right in from the store proper. I left to put up the stuff in my cart, and when I came back, I saw her. She was standing about 40 feet from the back entrance, still as a statue. I froze when I saw her. I watched her stare into the back for what felt like hours before she suddenly turned and walked away briskly. The girl that I was talking to was still in the back when I got back. She was a lot more awkward after that. The girl quit 3 days later and just about crushed my ribs when she hugged me goodbye. She hated her job, so I would like to think that it didn't have anything to do with Lucy, but I don't know. I left the store not too long after that and got a job that didn't involve customer service. That wasn't the last time that I saw her though. The last time I saw Lucy was last week. I was walking home from work and decided to stop for dinner. I thought that I saw her online, but I convinced myself that it was someone else. I ordered it and sat down to eat. I was looking out the window while I ate, and she took the table between me and the window that I was looking out. She was some guy that looked vaguely similar, maybe a school friend. She was sat at an angle, so she was half looking at him, and every few seconds she would look right at me. I know that it was her. She had changed her hair, and it looked an awful lot like mine now. After I finished, I went to the bathroom because I felt sick. After washing my hands, I looked into the mirror and I felt like I could die. It hadn't occurred to me before, but I was wearing my work uniform, complete with a company name on my hat in big letters. She was reading my hat. Lucy hadn't been to my current job yet, but I'm sure she'll turn up eventually. I'm moving soon, so I'm just hoping I'm not here anymore when Lucy turns up. Lucy has been a part of my life for the last 4 years. We dated for 4 months in high school and she keeps turning up. I wasn't a paragon of mental health before I met her, but I feel like she broke me as a person and I'll never forgive her for what she did to me. Since her abuse and her stalking, I've developed serious trust issues. I get painfully nervous leaving my house, and people who show interest in me immediately put me on edge. I've tried to date since everything happened, but I just can't. It's too much work at this point, so I've decided that I'll stay single until I can work through my issues. But I'm begging you, Lucy, just leave me alone. This was 2015. I wasn't really actively looking, but I would pop on to OkCupid every few weeks to see if anything interesting was in my inbox. Being a female, I had a very active inbox. Sorry guys. And I noticed an email from an interesting, fairly local guy. The email was alright, which I don't mind talking about if the person asking is sincerely interested and respectful. We got to chatting. I had zero romantic or sexual interest, but thought this could be a relationship, a friendship. After a few months of chatting, he found me on the Book of Faces, asking if it was okay to send an ad request, and I agreed. We had been chatting, getting along well, and he seemed like a nice person. A little weird, but that's okay, because I'm a little weird myself. No big deal. We continued to chat here and there for about 2 years. He sends me birthday greetings, just a casual friendship. He had asked several times to meet to hang out, etc. I've considered, but at that time, I was running my own business and working upward to 70 hours a week, plus maintaining my own home, raising my younger child, older as an adult, and trying to balance 2 partners in an extremely needy, demanding, workaholic client who had no boundaries. 11 p.m. phone calls occurred without a note of hesitation or remorse on vacation. So, we meet up never occurred, but we kept in touch online. Late last year, a news story broke out about a man and his girlfriend taking advantage of and killing her younger teenage daughter. I never connected the name until a friend contacted me and said, "Oh, I see you're friends with this guy. Did you see the news?" The news stories all use his full legal name, not his nickname. Think Richard versus Dick, which is why I never connected the two. It was him. My then online friend of 2 years had done these horrible things to his girlfriend's teenage daughter, with the girlfriend's help. He's made several statements since then, stating that he always had this fantasy, and that this child was asking for it, and that it wasn't fun, murdering her, and he apparently thought it would be. It still sends chills down my spine. I dodged a bullet, big time. Be safe out there. You never know who was on the other side of that keyboard or phone call. My skin still crawls thinking about this guy. He saw me shopping for school supplies and things for my new apartment one evening during my first week of grad school and decided that I was his mark. I had just moved to my new college town. Didn't even have a cell phone yet after leaving the one my folks paid for during undergrad behind. I was grown and I could take care of myself. What a nitwit I was. As I left the parking lot with my purchases, I noticed this truck pull up behind me at the exit. It was late and there weren't too many people out. I pulled out and so did he. It was a few miles down a long retail street with lots of stoplights before my turn. As I drove, I realized the guy in the truck was trying to get my attention. I was in a relationship, so I ignored him. Over the next few miles, he kept trying to get me to look at him. Some red lights he would end up ahead of me, some behind or beside. At every light, he positioned himself so he could stare at me, either directly or in one of his mirrors. His gaze was unwavering and my anxiety rose. He was driving oddly, speeding up close to my bumper, hitting his brakes when he was in front of me, swerving close to my car a couple of times. Finally, at a red light where he was beside me, I glanced over and absolutely started to panic when I was met with an unbelievably empty, unwavering stare and realized that he was fiddling with himself. He was getting off on the fact that I was terrified. He was following me, and he was trying to force me to pull over. At one point, I scooted through an intersection on a hard yellow a couple of cars ahead of him, thinking that I could shake him. Nope. He went right around the cars at the light and ran the red and got back in front of me. A freeway entrance ramp came up and I tried to fake him out by putting on my signal and getting into the merge lane for it. He took the bait and started up the ramp. I quickly got out of the merge lane and continued straight. Again, I would hope that I would lose him, but he drove his truck down the embankment to keep following. At another light where he was beside me, I pulled through the light and then turned at the last possible second. He made a U-turn and ran another red to follow me. My panic really ramped up at that point. With no cell phone, no sense of direction in a new city, I really didn't know what to do. So I turned on classic rock and forced myself to sing along, and forced myself to go the speed limit, so I wouldn't crash out of terrified stupidity. I decided to drive to the supermarket across town, because I remembered it had a police station in it. He followed me all the way there. He burned out of a lot as soon as he saw all the cop cruisers parked out front. I filed a report and asked for a police escort home. I insisted because something told me this creep was waiting for me to leave the police station. And he was. As soon as I pulled out, I saw him. I pulled over and told the officer following me, and he went after him, but the truck had taken off and the cop couldn't catch him. The police got the surveillance video from the first store. It turned out this jerk had been dogging me the entire time that I was shopping. I saw him on footage following me through the store. I saw him follow me out, close enough to grab my elbow. I saw footage of him circling the lot in his truck waiting for me to pull out when I took too long to unload my cart. My heart sank. I was able to remember 6 to 7 digits of his plate and the make and model of his truck. But in the end, the cops did nothing. They said that it was a he said, she said, since the surveillance video didn't catch him doing anything unlawful, and it was a losing case to try to charge him with anything. I ended up trading vehicles with a friend for a couple of months to try to feel safer, and I went on with my life. I had no idea what this disgusting piece of crack did, just a handful of months later until almost 15 years had passed. I was watching a Discovery ID show about the kidnapping and murder of Sandy Jeffers. I almost fell out of my seat when I saw the mugshot of her killer, Aaron Lee Skeen. It was him. I was so disgusted that law enforcement did nothing in my case that I tracked down the investigator in the murder case, and after verifying some things about his vehicle that were changed in the TV reenactment to weed out people making crap up, she took my contact info and official statement. She could neither confirm nor deny that my run-in was with Skeen, but qualified her statement by saying, "At least you don't have to worry about him anymore because he got life without parole." I only wish something could have been done when he had terrorized me. Perhaps things would have been different for Sandy. So yeah, creepy murderous stalker crazy dude. Let's not ever meet again. When I was 16 years old, I decided to surprise my parents with a bouquet of flowers for Valentine's Day. We've always celebrated this as a family holiday rather than a romantic one. I didn't have a car to drive to a florist, but my high school was within walking distance of a hospital, boasting a gift shop that sells floral arrangements. Between classes during the week of Valentine's Day, I set off for the hospital by my lonesome, cutting across campus to walk through a network of side roads, populated with specialty doctors' offices that keep odd hours, and the sort of buildings where traveling doctors mainly hold surgery consultations or perform small procedures a few times a month. The trip there passed without incident. As I was walking back through said deserted roads with a vase of flowers in tow, I noticed an unkempt 1990s car close behind me. While my memory of the car is hazy, I am left with the impression that there were at least two men within whose faces I could not see. Initially, I assumed that the driver was simply afraid of hitting me, the reason that they weren't passing by. So I made a point of dramatically trudging further into the grassy shoulder of the road, demonstrating to them that they could safely drive ahead. They still refused to pass me by, continuing to creep along behind at a slow pace. Beginning to suspect that the driver was more interested in me than a destination, I began to walk faster. The car confirmed my suspicions by matching my speed, despite the impracticality of my shoes and the threat of spilling water from my vase. I commenced to run as quickly as I could, but they hit the gas and they matched my speed. I realized at this point that the car was following me, that there was no place in sight to notice, and I needed to get away. I bolted into the first parking lot that I saw. The car turned in after me. And despite there being only 2 or 3 cars in the spacious front parking lot, and there being no other sign of activity at the office, this car did not stop to park in the numerous spaces available there. The driver instead opted to pursue me into this partially under construction back portion of the slot behind the office. It passed every available parking space to corner me against a pile of debris and rubble from the construction, coming to a diagonal stop less than 3 feet away. Before anyone could emerge from the vehicle, I somehow managed to scale the small prominence of rubble against my back, vase in hand, and I jumped from its peak to land painfully on the other side, which fortunately was a plot of undeveloped land with sight of my high school campus. I took a quick peek back over my shoulder to see if they were still in pursuit, but the car had sped off after I had reached the top of the rubble pile, and it was now nowhere in sight. They had not parked in the lot at all. They had no business there. The driver was following me. I sprinted at top speed, and didn't stop until I was soaked with sweat in the dead of winter, and panting in the student lounge among my classmates, who didn't seem to give a crap when I told them, possibly because our hometown is supposedly a trafficking capital, and the crime rate is outrageous. Although I am convinced that this was something more informal than trafficking, as the dilapidated car suggested poverty. And I've read trafficking usually arises through grooming and not being taken off the streets. In retrospect, I should have told an adult, alerted campus security, and called the non-emergency line of the local police station. But I was young, foolish, and insecure, and afraid of getting in trouble for leaving campus, when I didn't have a signed permission form permitting me to do so. I kept trying to convince myself that I had misread the situation, or that I was overreacting. I don't know what I would have even told the police had I called them, as I was entirely ignorant on the subject of cars, and couldn't have identified the make of it if I had been asked, and I couldn't see the faces of the occupants. I was also worried that my parents would restrict my already extremely limited freedoms if they knew that I had been in danger. I feel horrible for having never told anyone, and honestly hope that my secrecy hasn't led to someone being hurt. I believe the only missing people aside from runaway children or elderly adults with dementia in the city right now, though, are men, aside from one woman a few decades ago. Whoever followed and tried to trap a 16-year-old with flowers at a doctor's office, what's wrong with you? This happened when I was 5 and my best friend was 6. A quick layout of our school. The building was L-shaped and the short end was not in use at the moment, and cars could stop to the right of the L, in full view or behind the short part, mostly obscured. The road was pretty much in a square around the school, but only in the aforementioned places cars could pull over. We were at school one day and she did something that had made me angry. She grabbed my colored pencil without asking. I wanted revenge. Shortly afterwards, recess had started, and about halfway through, I saw my best friend walking towards the back of the short building, and I followed her thinking that she was going to do something fun. When I rounded the corner, I saw a man in a car giving her candy through the open passenger door. Well, trying to. My childish mind thought, why doesn't that guy just step out to give the candy? Now he's holding it just outside her reach and she has to climb into the car to grab it, and his seat will get all dirty. My friend had one knee on the car seat, reaching for the candy now. I suddenly realized that this was the perfect time for my revenge. I would stop her from getting candy from this man. So I yelled at her that she wasn't allowed to be this close to the road. We would get in heaps of trouble if we were caught near the road instead of on the playground, and that I would tell on her. This caused her to jolt back, and she ran away from the car, back to the school playground, taunting me with the fact that a passerby thought she was so pretty that he wanted to give her candy but not to me. Apparently a teacher saw me walk towards the road and was on her way to fetch me. So she was just around the corner from us when my friend started taunting me. She heard what was said and quickly ran the last few steps towards us, frantically asking us, "Did anyone get in the car? Did you see any classmates get into the car?" She was clearly panicking and the car was long gone by now, having driven off when I yelled at my friend. My friend answered, "No, the nice man just wanted to give me candy, but she said that she would tell on me so we ran back. I really wanted that candy. Are we in trouble now?" The teacher escorted us inside, had all the other teachers count heads, everyone was there, and talked to the police that were called. Neither me nor my friend knew what was wrong at that time, until their parents came to fetch her and gave her a stern talking to about accepting candy from strangers, saying things like, "We've talked about this, and we have plenty of candy back home." My mom was proud of me because she thought that I had listened to the stranger danger talks and protected my friend. I didn't correct her. A few years ago, my best friend and I were talking about our old school, and this day came up. We both just realized that if I hadn't been so obsessed with those colorful pens, or if she had asked before taking them, that she could have been taken and suffered a pretty bad fate. She couldn't believe how stupid she was for thinking that a random guy would really offer candy to kids from his car, especially since her parents had warned her about strangers before. I just felt embarrassed for not recognizing the situation from the talks that my parents gave me, and being so focused on getting revenge. It took me a while longer to fully realize what could have happened to her. I don't know if the guy was ever arrested or did anything else, and after this incident, my school started permanently posting a teacher as a lookout near the road. As far as I know, there were no more incidents at that school, and it was never really spoken of again. The official reason for the lookout teacher was to prevent students from running out onto the road and getting run over. When I drove past last year, they had put a fence all around the school. I'm guessing it's because they finally realized a fence is cheaper than paying a teacher an hour a day to just stand around. So, when I was in high school, it was my senior year. I was 5'3", about 95 pounds. I was at a park down the street from my house, waiting for the school bus. Usually, my boyfriend, who was already graduated, would drive me to school, but he was busy. I later found out that he was cheating. Well, there was usually a few of us girls that were waiting there, but this day, I was the only one. So, I sat at the bench and had one headphone in, and one out so I could listen to my surroundings. I've always been cautious of what's going on around me. As I waited, a black Honda pulled up and I immediately noticed it. I kept an eye on it because I had a bad feeling about it. I wasn't making it obvious that I was watching it, because I didn't want to look crazy. But after a few minutes, two big men got out. I immediately texted my boyfriend that I was at the park and that these guys were creeping me out. Of course, he didn't text back, so I copy-pasted the same text to my cousin who was home. I lived with my aunt and two guy cousins, unwinding down from the night shift. I wanted someone to know the car make and color, plus it was two men. I didn't get any responses. When they got out of the car, they started to walk towards me. So I got up from the bench and I walked towards the street, because the bus was supposed to be there any minute. The driver actually ended up being a little bit late. As I stood there by the street, these men walked up to me and I could feel their bad energy. One guy said hello as the other stood there staring me down. I just gave them a small smile and a nod, and then I looked away. And then the same guy, I'll call him number one, asked how old I was. I didn't respond. I could tell the other guy, number two, was getting mad that I wasn't feeding into it. And then number one kept asking me yes or no questions, like, do you have a boyfriend? And do you live close? Do you do drugs? We have some, do you want some? And then number two asked me if I knew what the black market was. I felt a cold rush go over my body, and I got the chills. Number two, who was quiet the whole time, started to tell me that they just got back from Russia, but the way that he said it was so scary, almost intimidating. I knew they were from somewhere else because they had strong accents, but I couldn't pinpoint the place. They kept telling me to go to their car because they had drugs. I said no thank you. Trust me, I wasn't a straight edge in high school, but I wasn't stupid either. I would never get into somebody's car that I didn't know. And then number one came up to me and asked if I had a car. I said no and that my bus is almost here. Sorry, I gotta go. And by some sort of miracle, the bus rounded the corner and the guys backed off. They had been inching closer and closer as they had asked me questions. But before the bus got to me, number one handed me a card and said he has a car shop and to call him if I ever need anything. He even stated that he would give me a free car. The card looked shifty and I didn't want to grab it, but I knew that I needed that number on it to report it. And so I took it, and they walked off super fast. Finally, the bus stopped and it picked me up. As soon as I got on, I started to cry. I had a complete meltdown. It was like all of the adrenaline was keeping my mind and body aware and focused, while the men were there. But as soon as I was safe, my body and mind gave out. Thankfully, there weren't many people on the bus, so the driver calmed me down before we took off, and I explained to her what had happened. When she looked around for the car, they were gone. She said that she saw them around me, but thought that I knew them because they were so close to my person. The driver called into her dispatch saying that there is an incident, so that they can notify the school. She continued to pick up all of the other students, but when we got to the school, she walked me into the office. I was absolutely terrified to be alone. The principal came out and so did campus security. They were so sweet and gentle with me as they brought me back to the principal's office. Both were men and they proceeded to ask me questions about the men, their car, and the questions the creeps had asked me. I cried the whole time. And then I pulled out the card the guy gave me and I handed it to the principal. He looked at the security and said he was going to call them and act like my dad. And so he did. It was on speakerphone and number 1 answered. I knew his voice as if it was burned into my brain. It took everything in me not to have a panic attack. The principal asked the guy if he could get him a car at a good price, and the guy played dumb. The principal said that his daughter, me, gave him the card. As soon as he said that, the guy hung up. They tried calling again and the phone was shut off. Then eventually, it disconnected. I could see a shift in the principal and the security as soon as the phone had clicked. The security got on his phone and called the police, and they had them come to the school. It was as if they finally knew it was real, like my crazy story wasn't made up. The principal excused himself and the security guard, and they talked for a minute in the hall. I could hear everything that they were saying. She's lucky to be alive. This is serious. We need to call her parents to come get her. When the police got there, they came into the office that I was sitting in, and they asked me for the story again, and in front of the principal and security guard. I feel like they wanted to see if I was being 100% honest, so I obliged. The officers were straight up with me and told me it sounded like they were watching us girls at the park because they chose the one day that one of us were alone. He also said the card was being used as bait to get me to go where they had wanted. I felt sick. I couldn't breathe. The school called my aunt, but she didn't pick up. The only person that picked up first was my boyfriend. One of the officers talked to him, as the other finally got a hold of my aunt. My boyfriend ended up picking me up and taking me home, and I cried the whole time. When I got there, my grandma, uncle, aunt, mom, and cousins were all out front. The women were all in tears and the men were livid, but worried for me. A week later, some girl at another local high school not far from the park was saved by other students. She was being dragged into a black Honda by 2 guys. The other kids stood up and grabbed her and pulled her out of the car. The principal called me into his office, and that's how I found out. They also had the same officers there and had me choose the 2 guys out of a picture lineup. I pointed them out so fast, they were caught. It was in fact those 2 guys that tried grabbing the girl, a freshman girl. I felt worried for her instead that she went through worse than I did, and I felt almost free again. Still scared, but not looking over my shoulder as often. I couldn't believe they were caught. After that, my family teamed up to drive me to school for the rest of the year. My boyfriend, now ex-boyfriend, also took me some days. I'm thankful to be alive and well, and I'm even more thankful that that girl was also saved by the courageous kids at our high school.